So let's go ahead. We're going to take a look at how to create a portlet the Liferay way using our Liferay module project. So before we do, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. Gonna collapse some of my different windows, close all the tabs that I don't need, just so I don't get lost in whatever it is that I may have open. So let's start off by creating a Liferay module project, just as we always do. Let's head up to File, up here at the top left, selecting New, followed by Liferay module project. So File, New, Liferay module project. The name of the project is going to be a little bit funny. It's going to be Portlet module Portlet. Right, we'll take it for what it is. Again, you could realistically name the project whatever you want. So Portlet module project. We'll keep all of the defaults, assuming that your defaults are the same as mine. So Gradle 7.1, and then we are indeed creating a Liferay Portlet project, so we can leave that one alone as well. Once you have all of those defaults there, go ahead and click Next. So once you click Next, first thing we need to do is name our component, right? It's going to be a Portlet component. So again, we'll stick with what we saw earlier. We'll call this the Portlet module Portlet. Right, I'm just following the book here. All right, so that's going to be the name of our component class. And then for the package name, we're going to call it com.liferay.training.portlet module. Right, if we wanted to specify some specific properties, we could by clicking on that green plus button here and then adding the properties. But let's leave that alone and click Finish. Right, we'll wait for the project to be created. Taking a peek again, down here at the bottom right, just waiting for our project to be created. I'll expand out the modules folder and we'll just wait a little bit. It looks like it's almost done and should be done. Yeah, there it is right there. So let's go ahead and we'll expand it out and take a look at some of the aspects, the anatomy of our Portlet module project. The first place we can take a look is over here in the source main Java. We can head over to source main Java and you're going to see two packages. The first one is going to contain the name of our portlet. So we abstracted out the name into a file called portlet module portlet keys. So if you want to take a look inside, it'll look a little something like this. Next up is the second package. This is where our portlet component or portlet class is going to be located. So we can go inside there and you'll see it looks pretty bare bones, right? One of the cool aspects is the component annotation within the property element already has a number of properties specified here. So makes our lives a little easier. And in fact, everything is already set, already ready for deployment. Let's take a little bit more of a gander, take a little bit more of a journey through the Portlet project. So expanding out source main resources, we have a folder called content, which contains our language property file. We'll get into that a little bit later. The meta-inf folder, followed by resources, is where our JSPs are at. So just like what we did in the previous example, right, to simulate what we actually do within Liferay. So we have two JSPs here. Init.jsp is used to contain all of the different tag libraries that we're going to be using. View.jsp will reference or include init.jsp so that we can leverage those tag libraries as we need them. So technically speaking, our application should be ready to go, but as I'm making this video for you, there are still a couple of hurdles that we need to get over first. So the first thing is over here in our build.gradle. So inside of our build.gradle is where we have a lot of our dependencies that are being picked up. And so right now, Liferay DXP 7.1 uses Portlet 3.0, the JSR 362. And you'll see here inside of my build.gradle that I'm currently specifying the 2.0. And so what we're going to do is we're going to change that up a little bit. So instead of using the 2.0 Portlet API, I'm going to use the 3.0.0. So 3.0.0 and then save. Now, one of the things that becomes a must whenever you modify your build.gradle, you are always going to perform a Gradle refresh. So a couple different ways we can Gradle refresh. You can right-click the project, head down to Gradle, and then refresh Gradle project. Right, this will ensure that you're picking up the proper dependency that you specify in build.gradle. Alternatively, if you want to use the keyboard shortcut, you can use Control F5, and then you'll also perform the Gradle refresh as well. You can take a peek down here at the bottom right and wait for the process to be finished. Right. So I'm going to expand out my project and external dependencies just to confirm that I have the proper file selected. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop my application into the server like so. Right. And then after some time, you should see a print statement inside of your console letting you know that the Portlet module has been started. So I'm going to go ahead and I see it in my console. We're going to head over to our instance of Liferay in the browser, and we're going to refresh the page. And let's go ahead and try to add the application that we have just deployed. So after refreshing the page, heading over to Add, followed by Widgets, followed by Sample. Under the sample section, we have our Portlet module, Portlet, and go ahead and add it using one of the methodologies we talked about, either drag and drop or clicking on that add button. So now that we have the application added to the page, let's go ahead and take a look at how we're able to implement some of our render phases, more specifically our Portlet phases, but more specifically the render phase. Got a little bit tongue-tied there. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating two render URLs. Each one of these render URLs is going to do something a little bit different. So let's go ahead and take a look at how to do this. Okay, so let's head back over to Liferay Developer Studio. And first place I'm going to head over is the view.jsp. So let's head over to the view.jsp with our Portlet module Portlet project. Make sure you have the correct one selected. If you have multiple view.jsps open, right, it's a little dangerous. So just make sure you have the proper or the one that corresponds with our current project. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the p tag and everything there. So I'm going to keep this clean. All right. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a render URL. So we're going to be creating two Portlet render URLs. So we'll start off easy here. So Portlet : render URL. Okay. And then we can have this end as well. So we can close that off like so. So there's one Portlet render URL and then two. So autocomplete to the rescue. Now, two render URLs, and we can provide a var or a way to reference the URL without having to reference this whole chunk right here. So I'm going to call the first var, or I'm going to declare the first var for the first render URL and this is going to be called view red URL. So we're going to display this render URL or the render URL within a specific color or the background. So once we finish, we'll take a look at what that looks like. So the first one is going to render our portlet red. The second one, we're going to render our portlet yellow. So this is where these names are coming from, is what color are we going to be rendering our portlets. Okay. So with the portlet URL, you're able to pass a specific parameter. So portlet : param. And then the name of the parameter is going to be called background. Okay, let's call it background color to be more specific. And then the value of background color will be the color that we want to render this portlet. So red in this situation. And let's not forget the closing tag like so. And then we're going to do the same thing with the second portlet URL. Right, so portlet param name equals same parameter background color, and then the value of this one is going to be yellow, and then we'll close that off there. Okay. All right, so spelled yellow incorrectly here, and let me confirm everything looks good. So far, so good. Sometimes the errors here are a little bit funny. Eclipse doesn't render JSPs all that great. Right, so we're going to trust that so far things are okay. Right, and then if there's any issues, we can resolve them. So we created 2 render URLs here. Now, what we want to do next is we want to provide links, hyperlinks, so that when the end user clicks the link, it's going to invoke one of the URLs. So 2 links, one for each one. So put this in our div class here, and we're going to be using a button group. Okay. So button group. Okay, close the div tag. Thank you, Eclipse, for the autocomplete. And then we're going to have 2 anchor tags here, and we're going to display them as buttons. Okay, so button default button here. Right, and then this is going to be linked up or referencing, right, the view.jsp that we or the render URL above. So let's start off with the one that's going to render our portlet red. So we can reference the var name, so view red URL. Okay, and then we can have some text within the anchor tag, right? So you can call this something like set red, and then we can close this off. Nope, not div. Div tag is already closed. Okay, let's go ahead. We're going to do the same thing again. I'm missing a quote here, so let me double check that. Quote should be right here. All right, so let's check quote equals, looks good. All right, let's do this one more time. A class, the default button. Okay, and then linking up to our other render URL. Okay, so equals quotes, and then referencing the view yellow URL, making sure to close the quote here. And that's what I forgot. Let's see, I need to close the tag here. You guys are probably screaming at me, close the tag, close the tag. There we go. So we got that taken care of. And then we'll set yellow will be the display here. Okay. All right, so 2 render URLs, 2 anchor tags, each one corresponding to each other. So one anchor tag, when it's clicked, will invoke the render URL above, right? And then the second one is going to invoke the second render URL that we see. Okay. So next up is we want to be able to retrieve the background color. So what's going to happen is when the render URL is invoked, it's going to pass the parameter over to the Java side. At the Java side, it'll then be sure to set that the actual value of the background color so that it will come when it comes back here to the view.jsp, we will actually display the portlet within that color. So we're going to be using some CSS to help us out with the rendering of our portlet with with that color in mind. So we're going to be adding our next chunk of code right up above. Okay. So we're going to start off by using a scriptlet here, right, giving us a little bit of space here. Starting off with a string. Okay, we're going to call the string CSS style, right, and it's going to be blank. Okay, next up, right, we'll have another string, background color. Oh, didn't need the space there. And let's tab this way, a little bit too far. Okay, and we're going to get the background color string from our render request object. So render request dot get parameter, and then the parameter that we're going to grab is going to be that background color. Okay, so as we are re-rendering the view.jsp from the render request object, we want to grab that parameter background color. Okay, let's do a little bit of checking just to make sure that there is actually something in the background color. So assuming that it is not null and the background color, right, is not empty. So the background color is not empty. Okay, let's go ahead and apply our CSS style. Okay, so the CSS style, let's spell that correctly, is going to be equal to, right, the background color. And we can display that. So that way we know that a color has actually been selected. Okay, and then gotta tack on that. Right, so that way it actually looks like it's, displaying in a specific style here. Let's make sure to call it what it is, the background color. Okay, and then let's go ahead, we'll add some more CSS flair here. All right, so we got rid of this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to add it back. So that paragraph that we got rid of a little bit ago, I'm going to add it back here. Oh, here we go. Okay, and then CSS style. Right, this is going to be the color. Okay, so let me make sure I also close that div tag there. Okay. The class equals caption. Okay, and then I'll close the p tag just to be neat before I forget. Right, and then we're going to display that Liferay UI message. Key, and then it's going to be the name of our portlet. Right, JSR 286 portlet.caption. All right. And then gotta close that tag as well. All right, so once we save, since this is auto deployed, we can come back to our instance of Liferay inside of our browser, refresh the page, and let's see what happens. So if I click set red, it sets that caption to red. If I click set yellow, it changes it to yellow. We need to double check some of the code here since these are not buttons. So let me double check here. And that's my fault. Let me remove these dashes here. Okay. Rookie mistakes here. All right, let's try this again. Heading back over, refresh the page. And there we go. There's our button group. Caption kind of looks funny, right? You can add whatever it is that you want to have displayed at the end of the day. Doesn't really matter. All right. Whew. So pretty long exercise. We saw how we can implement the render method or the render phase through those render URLs. One more thing that we're going to do before we call this exercise good is we're also going to be handling the action phase as well. So let's go ahead and create our action URL over in the view.jsp. Right, so over here in the view.jsp, we're going to create our action URL. Right, and so we're going to head down towards the bottom of our JSP here, below our div class, and we're going to be creating our portlet action URL. So portlet :action URL. Let's spell that right. Action URL. Right. We're going to give our action URL a name. So the name is going to be equal handle form. Okay, and then we're going to give this a var. Right, so the var is the way we can reference the action URL within the JSP, right, without having the whole action URL included. So let's just call this action URL, make it simple on ourselves, and then we'll close that tag. What we're going to do next is we're going to create a kind of simple dropdown using Alloy UI, Liferay's, or one of Liferay's tag libraries to help us out with the creation of a form. So I'm going to create a form using Alloy UI. So the tag is AUI form. Okay, and then I'm going to close this off here. AUI form like so. Right. Now, within the AUI form, when a specific action is performed on it, like when the form is submitted, right, I want to call the action URL that we just referenced or created above. Right, so in doing so, we're going to be referencing the action URL right above. Okay. All right, so that part there is done. And then we can do some stylistic things here, right? Just some slight adjustments, right? We don't have to, but again, just to kind of make things a little bit more neat. Okay, so let me check my syntax there. All right, that looks good. Right, so using Alloy UI, we can create kind of like a drop down or a selector. So just select, and whatever value we choose or select is going to be stored within our background color variable. So background color, like so. Okay, and then from the AUI select, let me make sure to close it. And then just touch up our styling here. And then from here, we can provide whatever options we want. So AUI option label equals, and then whatever colors you want. So something like aqua for one example. Right, let me close that. Okay. You can do, whichever colors kind of appeal to you. I'll do a couple here. Gray. And I'll do one more option. Let's see. Let's do silver. Why not? Okay. All right. And let me double check again. Make sure all of my syntax here is good. AUI option label equals. All right. Let me check the AUI form up above. Selector is closed. All right. I think nope. I need to close that right there. There we go. Cool. All right. So with all of that, again, everything is being deployed automatically, but we're not quite there yet. But let's take a look at what it looks like anyways. Right, so once I refresh the page, I'm going to be looking and see what errors we get. So again, not quite there just yet. So let's see any errors coming my way. Let's see. Quote symbol expected. Right, so I forgot a quote somewhere. Let me take a look and see where that might be. Yeah, there it is. So margin top, right, there's that. Background color. Okay, let's try again. So now that that is saved, right, I'll refresh one more time. Right, so it's taking a little bit longer. I have to drop down and select something. Right, and we see right now nothing is really happening just yet. Right, I need a submit button. So let's go ahead and implement that next. So we see the progress is coming along. So I'm going to use AUI once again to help me create a button. So AUI is going to be called a button row. Right, and then we'll close it. Right, so AUI button row. And then this is going to be AUI and then button. What type of button? It's going to be a submit button. So submit, and then we can give it a value equals and then send. And then let's go ahead and close this off. Right. So once you save, I'll head back once again, refresh the page. Right, so here's my background color. I have my send button. So if I click gray and then click send, we see that nothing really happens. Right, so the process action method is being called, right, but right, nothing is really going on. Right, so our process action method is not implemented. Right, we're going to go ahead and implement that process action. So we're going to implement that process action with a MVC action command. Right, so let's go ahead and we're going to head over to the Java side. I personally like the Java side better, and create an MVC action command. So before we do a couple things here, right? So our action URL is going to pass the parameter called handle form. And so our MVC action command, right, is going to listen for this parameter handle form, right? We then need to pick which portlet we're listening for, right? And that's going to be stored over here in the constants. So we're listening for the portlet module, and we're going to touch that up a little bit. Okay, so let's head over to our project here, and we're going to create a new package. So in this case, I'm going to create the package and the class at the same time. Let's go ahead, we'll right click the source main Java, head over to new, followed by class. All right, we're going to start off by specifying the package. So I'm going to click the Browse button to make our lives a little easier. And I'm going to select COM Liferay Training, Portlet, Portlet module, Portlet. Funny name, I know. And then from there, let's go ahead and click OK. All right. In the package, I'm going to create a new one by tacking on or appending dot action. And then from here, we're going to give our Java class a specific name. So I'm going to follow the Liferay convention here. The first part can be anything. So I'll call it handle form. Second part, we like to specify what type of MVC command we're going to make. So MVC action command. Right? Now, if I were to do this in real life, I would click browse and then select the superclass. But for this one example, I'm going to walk through the steps and the train of thought. So from here, we're going to go ahead and click finish. So we're creating our first MVC action command and creating the package that's going to be stored in. So the first part here is identifying what we're trying to do. So in this case, I am trying to create an MVC action command. Now, you may go through documentation and try to find out which interface or base class you're going to be implementing or extending. In documentation, you'll see that you're going to be extending a class called base MVC action command. Right? So go ahead, take some time to pause, look through documentation and confirm. But if you trust me, you can go ahead and proceed with what we're doing. From here, I'm going to use Control-Shift-O to bring in my import for the base MVC action command. Next part here is we need to make this a component. We need to register this Java class as a service within the OSGI service registry. So at component annotation and tack on the parentheses here to specify what properties we may have or what attributes, what elements in the component annotation. All right, so Liferay convention, the first thing we like to do is specify the property immediate equals true. This is basically telling the OSGI container, hey, if you are able to start the component, just start it. Don't wait for anything. Okay, so that's the first part. Second is going to be the property element. So specifying specific properties that could be set for this specific component. We know that we have to set 2 properties. We're going to come back to that soon. And then finally, a rule of thumb here is if you see the keyword implements, typically speaking, you don't need to add this next line. But if you see the keyword extends, this next part becomes mandatory. So we need to register the component as a specific service type. Since we are not directly implementing an interface, the OSGI container is not going to know. So we got to let the OSGI container know what type of service are we going to register this component as. So typically, not all the time, but most of the time, if you are looking at it, a Liferay class, the interface is typically without the base. And so my nifty rhyme here is drop the base and you have the interface. And then tack on this dot class at the end. I'm going to use one more Control-Shift-O to bring in the component import. And now we need to specify our 2 properties here. So 2 properties that I need to specify. Right, the first one is going to be which portlet am I listening to? So javax.portlet.name equals what? Right, the second property is what is the parameter that I am listening for, or technically speaking, the MVC command name. So let's start with the easy one, the portlet. So the portlet, when we are creating it using a Liferay module project, is going to be stored within the constants. So I can reference the Portlet module Portlet keys dot, and then there's the name here. So pretty simple there. And then the MVC command name, right? So this is the name that's declared within the action URL. So back over here in the view.jsp, right, we highlighted the name handle form. So that's going to be the parameter or the MVC command name that I'm going to be listening for. So handle form. Okay. And then the last step here is I need to implement my method. So the easy way to do this is I'm going to highlight the MVC command here, and then I'm going to select the add unimplemented methods. Okay, pretty simple. It gives us the do process action, and then it's going to be from here that I'm going to, do whatever sort of logic that I need to do. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create another method here. So I'm going to create a method, and we're going to call it handle action command. You don't have to go this route. This is just kind of being a little bit more fancy. Okay, I'm going to take the action request object, and then there it is. So action request object, and I'm creating this method called handle action command. Right. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to print to the console just the fact that we're here. So I can do something like inside handle action command. All right. From there, what I want to do is I want to grab the background color parameter. So I can get that from the action request object. So what we'll do is we'll get the variable or create a variable called background color. And the value of background color is going to be from the action request object. And we're going to get the parameter. And the parameter name is going to be background color. Right, so pretty simple there. Right, and then just to be sure that everything is fine and dandy here, right, I'm going to print out the color. Okay, so the color, we can just say background color is, and then the actual background color variable. Okay. So pretty simple there. And then we're going to call the handle action command that I just created, and we're going to pass the action request object. Right, so we could took all the code, or we could have taken all the code, place it above, but we'll try it this way. Right, go ahead and save, and we're going to head back over to our instance of Liferay. I'll refresh the page here really quick, and we'll test this out. Oh, let's say gray. Yep, changes it to gray. We'll try silver. Changes it to silver. Aqua. Changes it to aqua. So very good. Before we call it good, right, I know we've spent a lot of time here, but one last recap before we sign off for this exercise. All right, so first thing we did was we created our Liferay Portlet or Liferay module project. We saw that the module project had everything we need just to deploy it. So we deployed and we saw, yeah, it worked. From there, we headed over, and the whole objective of this exercise was to basically display a specific text in a specific color. And so what we did was we created two render URLs invoking the render phase, and we're going to be passing a specific parameter within the render URL or the render request. So render phase is called. As the JSP is re-rendering, it'll grab the background color up here from the render request object, and then we're going to apply that background color as some CSS style. Okay. From there, we then saw how to implement the action URL. We created our action URL here, and with the help of Alloy UI, created a form in which we can select other colors. When we click on that submit button, it's going to invoke the action URL. And in order to handle the action phase in Liferay, we need to implement or create an MVC action command. So I created an MVC action command by extending base MVC action command. I specified two properties. Which portlet am I listening for a specific action or action URL, and what parameter is that action URL going to pass? Once those three things have been met, action URL from a specific portlet passing a specific parameter, we call it the do process action, right? We grab the background color and then we pass it off within the action request, right? That parameter will then follow through down to the render request. We'll then grab the parameter background color in the view.jsp and then display our text with that color. So very long exercise, but showing a lot of different features, a lot of different essentials of our Portlet component.